So today we're with Rosie Bissett, who is the CEO of Dyslexia Association of Ireland. You're very welcome to the show.
Thanks very much.
Did I get your title right?
You did indeed. It's a bit of a
Good.
mouthful,
I
but
have
yeah.
to give you your due desserts. So tell us a bit, for a starter, about dyslexia, what it is and how it affects you.
Okay, so dyslexia, I suppose, at its simplest level, is a specific learning difference or difficulty that causes challenges with becoming accurate and fluent with literacy. So I suppose people will be most common with it as thinking about it in children, where they struggle to grasp reading and spelling at the same rate, perhaps, as their non-dyslexic peers. But it can also affect other areas because it's not solely literacy. There are also things like there can be aspects of difficulty with short-term memory, with sequencing, with organizational skills, and certainly some of those challenges obviously become exacerbated under time conditions, which is why things like our lovely Leaving Cert exam is particularly one of the most challenging
Yeah, I'd imagine.
things for a student with dyslexia.
And what about dyscalculia? Is this related?
It is indeed. So dyscalculia is sometimes people call it the maths dyslexia, but it can co-occur with dyslexia, and essentially it's a specific difficulty with learning and understanding maths. Dyscalculia is not as well known as dyslexia, and usually it would be where someone has a very poor sense of number. They don't their understanding of numbers, their understanding of, let's say, scale and quantity, their ability to do calculations, those things again don't come as easily. They need a lot more concrete instruction, a lot more repetition to grasp mathematical concepts.
Can you give us some stats on how many people have both dyslexia and dyscalculia?
Mhm. In terms of dyslexia, internationally, generally, it would be recognized that about 1 in 10 of the population have some degree of dyslexia. But I suppose with both dyslexia and dyscalculia, it's important to note that they are what are called sort of a spectrum condition. So people will obviously be familiar with the word spectrum from autism, but spectrum also applies to a lot of the other neurodiversity, neurodivergent conditions like dyslexia and dyscalculia, that they go from very mild to very severe in terms of the impact they have on the individual. So as I say, for dyslexia, it would be roughly 1 in 10. So that would be, let's say, 3 children in every classroom. So quite common. And obviously some of those will be on the mild end, some of those will be on the more severe end of being affected. For dyscalculia, because dyscalculia is not as well known yet or as well researched, the stats are not as, I suppose, solid for dyscalculia in terms of
Right.
incidence, but you could be talking about maybe 5 to 7%, something like that for dyscalculia.
Are they both lifelong conditions?
They are. So if someone has dyslexia, you always have a dyslexic brain, or you'll always have a dyscalculic brain. Okay, and some things will be more challenging for you, but like so many things, if the profile is identified early, and if the individual gets, good, effective instruction and enough of it, and at the right time, and high quality, then it can certainly really mitigate the impact of it. So it's not so, let's say if someone is dyslexic, sometimes you'll hear people saying, oh, I was dyslexic when I was in school, you know, which is, and I suppose the reason people say that is because in school, that's where we're asked to do, where we're learning literacy, and we're asked to do an awful lot of reading and writing.
Yeah.
So therefore it's often at its maybe highest there, in terms of an impact. But depending on what job you're doing, or let's say maybe you're doing a job that doesn't require a lot of reading and writing, but let's say someday you have to go into the intro office, or you're faced with someone is asking you to fill out a form. So again, I suppose it's like that. If you're looking at the social model of disability, the same would apply to things like dyslexia and dyscalculia. It very much depends on the environment that you're in. So if you're in a situation where you're not being asked to read or to spell or to do maths, if you're dyscalculic, then those things really don't make any difference to you at that moment in time. They're kind of, in some ways they're almost irrelevant to your experience at that moment. But if you're thrown into a situation where, let's say you're in work and someone says, would you read out that in the team meeting? And that's just the absolute, challenge of that, the fear of reading out loud and making an error in front of work colleagues will say, suddenly could flip someone from feeling totally on top of things to, really in a quite traumatized place, perhaps because of their dyslexia.
Is there a very common first sign in a child, or does it vary from child to child?
It does vary from child to child, but certainly, I suppose the biggest thing is that the child is not picking up literacy, so they're not picking up the alphabet. They're struggling to make those solid connections between the sounds and the symbols, as in the written letter. Okay, they're not picking that up as quickly as the other children in the class. Sometimes there are earlier signs, so but the early signs, let's say in preschool, can be common to lots of neurodiverse profiles. So it's hard, they can be an indicator that a child may experience some challenges, but it's difficult to say for certainty if it might be dyslexia or dyspraxia or a language difficulty, we'll say. So some kids, let's say preschool, they may have difficulty with things like even with speech, they might have slight language delay, or they may mix up the sound order in words. So let's say instead of hospital, they might say hostiple, or pashgetti instead of spaghetti. Now, all kids will do that to a degree because that's how we learn language. We make mistakes and then we learn to correct. But if you have a dyslexic profile or, let's say a language developmental language disorder, you're going to continue doing those sound mix-ups a lot later than you would expect. Things like, difficulty following long sequences of instructions. So, classic thing parents will relate to is maybe you ask the kid to go upstairs, put on your pajamas, brush your teeth, grab that book and come back down, and then we'll read a little story before you go to bed. They might go up the stairs, they might head towards the bathroom, but then they forget maybe, what's been asked of them and get distracted. But I suppose, look, the biggest thing in school is unexpected level of difficulty not picking up the sounds and literacy at the rate of their peers. And the other thing then is, because dyslexia and also dyscalculia are both known to have a strong genetic component, so a genetic predisposition, if there is a history in the family of dyslexia, that's a really strong, marker to say, look, keep a close eye on this child. So we know that if there is a parent or a sibling who has dyslexia, there's almost a 50% chance that the next child may have dyslexia or dyscalculia. So a strong family history is really one to watch out for. And obviously with the older generations, let's say even with grandparents, chances are in the grandparent generation, it may not have ever been formally diagnosed. They may never have had the opportunity to get their dyslexia identified. They may have just left school early or had poor literacy, or in an era maybe where they could do a job that didn't require a lot of literacy.
Is there a way of managing both conditions, or are there tools you can use?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of it, in terms of, let's say, it comes down to identifying the profile early, and then using, I suppose, really high quality, effective literacy or numeracy teaching to help the individual. And one of the things we would often say is, what's good for dyslexia is good for everyone. So it's not that there are special techniques or tricks or different ways of learning literacy or spelling for someone with dyslexia. It's just that for them, high quality and intensive literacy support and tuition is critical. Okay, for those who don't have dyslexia, there's a percentage of the population who will learn to read just almost by osmosis. They'll nearly absorb it and they'll learn it even without instruction. For a large part of the population, for another chunk of the population, a bit of instruction and they'll pick it up. But for individuals who have dyslexia or other neurodivergent profiles, the quality of instruction that they get and how much instruction that they get, because they often need a lot more repetition. They also need, we would also talk a lot about using multisensory approaches with them. So it's not just chalk and talk, but where we're using sound, we're focusing on the sounds in the word, we're reinforcing that with visuals. We might also be looking at, is there a practical activity we can do to help to reinforce that as well? So the more ways that you can teach it and the more repetitions you give, obviously you're giving the individual the best opportunity to learn that. So that's, I suppose, the kind of intervention side of it. And then as individuals get older, when you get, I suppose, realistically, once you get into second level and certainly in adulthood, you don't really have the space and time at that stage to be focusing on the fundamentals of reading and spelling. You're much more in a phase of your life where you need to be able to access. So it's about, how can I access my school book? How can I access that report I need to read for work? And at that stage, then you're maybe looking, instead of, I suppose, a direct intervention, you're looking at an accommodation around how can we work around that challenge? And that's where things like assistive technology can be incredibly helpful. So, many dyslexics and dyslexic adults are able to read, but what they're left with is sometimes their reading speed would be slower than a non-dyslexic, or they may need to reread a passage multiple times to get meaning out of it, because they have to work so hard to decode the individual words that they need to reread things for meaning. Whereas if they could use, let's say, text to speech, where the computer reads it out to them, then obviously that just speeds up and it helps to get around that block for them. Or similarly, whether it's with writing tech tools, it would be things like, maybe, let's say, the more advanced spell checkers, things like Grammarly can be really helpful, because they'll help to pick up spelling or grammatical errors in your writing, or even some people like using, let's say, voice notes. So so whether it's sending a voice note on WhatsApp, or using speech to text technology, which is now inbuilt into most devices. You don't even have to go and buy a fancy program. It's built into your mobile device. You can have it in Chrome or in Google Docs or Microsoft. Most of the common packages now have inbuilt speech to text and text to speech, which means it just makes that kind of assistive technology available to everyone.
So if I'm a newly diagnosed person with dyslexia, my family are worried about me, where did they go for help, or what did they do?
Well, I suppose, look, obviously I'd say to anyone, please don't hesitate to reach out to us in the Dyslexia Association. That's certainly what we're here to do, is to try and give people access to, I suppose, good evidence-based information on dyslexia and guidance about then maybe various supports depending on obviously the age of the individual. If someone is in school, in primary, in secondary, in college, or in the workplace, it's looking at what are the needs of the individual at that time, and I suppose giving them guidance around where they can access support for that. And I suppose I'd mention just specifically, we also have 2 online hubs which would be really relevant. We have our Dyslexia Hub, which is kind of for parents and children. So with lots of accessible information in video format, where you can learn more about dyslexia as a parent, understand how you can advocate for your child, supporting them with homework or accessing supports in school. And we also have on there access to a whole suite of literacy lessons that a parent can sit down with their child and work through together for free. And then we have an adult dyslexia hub, which is like the adult dyslexia version of that. So you can learn about dyslexia as an adult, about accessing maybe supports in either education and college FE settings or in the workplace. And then also on that, we have those supports around literacy tuition for adults, where you can sit yourself in your own time and say, you know what, I want to spend a bit of time and work through some structured literacy lessons, and work on developing my reading and spelling skills, so that's there as well for people to link in with.
So speaking of the organization, when was it founded and why?
The organization was founded in the early 70s, and like many others, including your own organization, I suppose,
Yeah.
founded by people who are directly affected. So literally the classic thing of, two mums sitting around a kitchen table frustrated because no one was, no one really knew about dyslexia at that stage. No one was using the term. And in fact, the first, I think, couple of decades of the organization, a huge frustration that they had was the even getting the Department of Education, getting teachers to acknowledge the word and use the word dyslexia was a huge issue. To the point that the association even changed its name for a period. So it changed from the Dyslexia Association to the Association for Children and Adults with Learning Difficulties, because of this whole argument about the word for so long. And then finally, in the 90s, when the department saw sense and realised that no, this thing does exist and has existed for a very, very long time, the association went back to its original name of Dyslexia Association of Ireland. Then at that stage, but I suppose that I suppose just goes to show you the challenge that there was there originally. In literally, it wasn't even around acknowledge. Just to get people to acknowledge the condition and acknowledge the name was a huge challenge for so many years.
The organization seems as important for children as it is for adults.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose it's like your great question earlier on, is dyslexia lifelong? Absolutely it is, and certainly I've seen in my time working with Dyslexia Ireland, a huge increase in the amount of adults that we're working with. We're still working with lots of children and parents and training teachers and all of that, but there's a much greater awareness now of adult dyslexia in workplace and education settings. And I think that's really, really important, because I think there's a lot of adults. There are adults who were lucky, maybe the younger adults who had the opportunity to have their dyslexia identified when they were younger, but we still have a huge number of adults who are dyslexic, but who never got that opportunity to have it identified. And for some of them, they had really horrible traumatic experiences in school and were made to feel stupid, were in some cases told leave school early, there's you're not teachable, or go and do an apprenticeship, or some job that they felt was suited to their literacy, or rather lack of literacy ability. But like, look, we know now that your ability to read and spell does not tell us a huge amount about your intelligence, particularly in the case of if you have a neurodivergent profile like dyslexia, in the same way as you can be an incredibly, intelligent individual and have dyscalculia, and really struggle with maths, but you can have huge strengths in other areas, so yeah, I think massive awareness in terms of the impact on adults, like in I suppose many things we see. Obviously there's an increase in adults with most of the neurodivergent profiles, looking for and seeking an assessment later in life, just as I think oftentimes it's very much from a self-esteem point of view and as a validation of their experience. It may not be that they perhaps have any desire or need to go back to education or anything like that. In fact, many adults will have developed maybe their own strategies for managing any challenges that they meet. But I think for a lot of them, it's hugely important from a mental health point of view to have that kind of independent verification of, you weren't stupid, you were not lazy, your brain works differently, and to have a name to describe your profile is incredibly powerful. And I think it often puts a lot of things into context for individuals, so yeah, I think we would always say to people, if you feel that you might have, and you've, I suppose, learned or read or listened to some videos about it, and you think this might be you, if you want to get an assessment, do that at any age. I mean, I always remember many years ago, a gentleman in his early 80s coming in for an assessment, and a lot of people would go, well, why would you bother doing that at that stage, But like that, for him, it was really important, even at that stage in his life, to have that external validation and say, you know what, it wasn't you were the awful stupid word. It wasn't that you were lazy. It was that your brain worked differently. And unfortunately, the system at the time didn't recognize that and didn't support you and provide the support that you needed. So like at any age, I think that can be, I think, yeah, it can be a really positive experience for an individual, if that's something that's important to them. There's also many adults who, are, they're happy to just maybe self-identify. For them, it's not important. They don't feel the need to go and get a formal assessment with, an independent, psychologist, we'll say. So it's very much up to the individual.
Yes, I can remember at school myself, there are certain individuals looking back on it. I would know now probably had dyslexia, but at the time they would have been laughed at and the teachers would have been very unenlightened,
Yeah.
reading out their work
Likewise.
and then the class, people in the class laughing and all that. It's terrible to look back on it.
It is. And I suppose, like, look, at the time it was, I suppose for the teachers, they were not trained,
Yeah,
and they were
yeah.
not given the information,
Mm.
and unfortunately, our teachers are still not given sufficient information, I think, on dyslexia and dyscalculia and lots of other, kind of disabilities and neurodiversity. They're still coming out of teacher training college, not always with as much information as you'd like them to have to really understand that. But I mean, it's certainly better in a lot of cases, but there's certainly still a lot more to be done in terms of really deepening the understanding, and particularly the whole issue of, I suppose, trauma as well. I think a lot of people can end up experiencing trauma if you're, and this is of all ages, but if you're in, let's say, a school environment which doesn't recognize your needs and belittles you and exposes the things that you're really struggling with, and where you're asked to read out loud and you are petrified every day. I mean, you're trying to count ahead and work out what sentence might it be by the time it comes around to me, and you're trying to prep that. But if you miscalculate, or if the teacher starts randomly picking people, it's incredibly traumatizing to live with that kind of low level of anxiety and fear that you're going to be exposed every single day in school. Now, thankfully, there's lots of really good teachers. There's lots of schools doing a better job now, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, we do still, even today in 2024, we do still sometimes get calls from parents and telling you about something a teacher said to their kid that has just crushed their child's spirit. So, like, while it's not as common now, that kind of negativity, it still does happen, and it really is incredibly traumatizing for individuals. And I think being sensitive to that and not, I think it's so important now we really look at people holistically. It's not, and look at and think about the impact of the experiences that people have, and the kind of throwaway remarks of, oh, must try, did you not even try, did you even bother working on that homework? I think a lot of people with dyslexia, with like homework particularly, is tricky as well, because of their dyslexia, things take longer. They'll probably have spent longer working on that homework assignment than the non-dyslexic child, but because of their dyslexia, there may still be spelling errors in it. So a throwaway remark from a teacher of, geez, you must have done that in 5 minutes, when actually they could have spent an hour and really worked super hard on it, but again, that's so demotivating, So one of the things we would say with teachers is also looking at, think about, don't, everything doesn't need to be brought down to spelling, So let's say if it is a writing assignment, it's look at the content, or, have a discussion with parents around how much time is being spent, and acknowledge the effort, not just how perfect the end result is, because it's about keeping people engaged and building individuals' confidence so that they'll keeping them motivated, so that they'll keep at it, in terms of building their skills, because none of us are brilliant at everything straight away. We all have to work and practice. Unfortunately, for dyslexics and dyscalculics, the areas that are most challenging are very literacy and numeracy, they cut across a lot of other areas, so it's so critical that they get the right support and that they're kept engaged and motivated and provided with those accommodations then to work around it at later stages if they need it, because they have loads of, they'll all have loads of individual strengths and skills and abilities in other areas, and it's making sure that society doesn't miss out on that as well.
You mentioned assessment a few times. What's involved in that?
So assessment for dyslexia or dyscalculia is in Ireland would be done with a psychologist, an educational psychologist, in fact. Now, like as you know, and your listeners will know, accessing assessment in this country is challenging. So the public route for children would be through NEPS, the National Education Psychological Service, but they are very understaffed to meet the level of demand. So accessing assessment through school is really challenging. Schools usually only have literally a handful of assessments that they can get done in any given year. And that's not just for dyslexia, it's for lots of other, sort of potential learning difficulties as well. So the reality is that the majority of parents end up seeking private assessment if they can afford it, or maybe coming to ourselves in the Dyslexia Association, and we offer reduced rate assessments for individuals on low income as well.
How is the organisation funded?
So we do get some government funding, but it would be less than kind of 25% of our total of what we need to run and deliver all the services that we do. So obviously it's only a fraction of what's needed. So aside from the as I say, the 25% of government funding, then the rest is we kind of operate as a social enterprise, I suppose. So let's say for some of our activities, we would run them on a non-for-profit basis. So we charge a fee, but then if people are unemployed or on low income, we do subsidise reduced rates to make it as accessible as possible. And then we would do a little bit of fundraising, obviously, as well. We are also a membership-based organisation, so our members pay a small membership fee each year, and I suppose that also helps to keep us going, to keep us here, to have someone answering the phone when a parent or an adult rings up, with a query or a concern, or to help us in terms of advocating for change as well, which is an ongoing thing, like yourselves and like all organisations, I suppose, in the space.
Have you any fundraisers coming up?
Well, at the moment, we're recruiting for people for the marathon, for the Dublin Marathon. We're also recruiting
as a million other
as our
organisations
million others, exactly. Yeah. We do a skydive every year as well. So we do a sponsored sort of parachute jump. So if anyone would like to jump out of a plane for dyslexia or dyscalculia, then reach out to us. We'll be doing that later in the year as well. To be honest, we don't do a huge amount of fundraising because we don't have any fundraising staff, so we don't have the kind of capacity that some of the big charities do, we'll say, in that regard. So we do a bit, and obviously then we do, let's say, online donations and things like that, or people will do. I know we have some wonderful women doing the mini marathon coming up in Dublin as well in early June too. So a few things like that. Yeah.
Very good. Now we're coming right to the end of our time. You'd be glad to know. Have you any other thing that you'd like to put out there?
Maybe just to say, one of our big campaigns at the moment is around exam accommodations. So we've been running a petition for calling on the government to bring in extra time in state exams for students with dyslexia and other learning difficulties like this, because we don't currently have it as an option in Ireland. We're very much out of kilter with international practice, and even in terms of what happens in further education and college here in Ireland, where if a student has dyslexia or dyscalculia and they go into the disability office in Trinity or in TU Dublin there in Blanchardstown, one of the first things that they'll say to them is, no problem, extra time in your exams. But unfortunately, you don't get it in your junior cert or your leaving cert. So we have a big campaign going on at the moment, and a petition on change.org if anyone would like to sign and add that. And in fact, it's being discussed in the petitions committee in the Oireachtas later on today, because we've brought it there to them as well to really try and get attention brought to this, because I suppose, look, it's past time that students had the option to have extra time in their exams,
Of
like
course.
their counterparts in other countries, to help address their challenges.
Finally, you'd be glad to know, how does anyone get in touch with the organisation?
So our, I suppose online is super easy, and that's the way most people seem to nowadays. So our main website is dyslexia.ie, dyslexia.ie. And you can email us at info@dyslexia.ie, and then our phone line is 018776001. So reach out or look at all our information online, and as I say, we're here to help if we can at all.
Rosie, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
No problem. Thanks.